The crystal chandeliers of the St. Jude's Hospital Grand Charity Ball dripped light onto the city's elite, a glittering constellation of wealth and influence. But for Imani, standing near the service entrance in her simple dark green scrubs, the light felt like an interrogation lamp. She had just finished a double shift, her body aching with a fatigue that went bone deep, but her supervisor had insisted all available staff make an appearance. It was a command disguised as a request, a reminder of her place in the hospital's rigid hierarchy. Her presence was required, but her visibility was not desired. She kept to the shadows, a faint throbbing starting behind the old, silvery scar that cut a delicate, jagged line from her temple to her cheekbone. It was a permanent reminder of the night that had stolen everything. The whispers followed her like a chill wind. "Can you believe they make the nurses attend?" One voice, sharp and brittle as spun sugar, drifted from a nearby table. "Especially that one. It's so distracting." Imani's hands tightened into fists inside the pockets of her scrubs. She knew they were talking about her, about the scar. It was the first thing people saw, the feature that defined her before she could even speak. Dr. Alistair Finch, the hospital's golden boy and chief of surgery, strolled past with a champagne flute in his hand, his smile as polished and cold as the marble floor. He paused, his gaze sweeping over her with theatrical disdain. "Imani," he said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by the surrounding tables. "Still haunting the halls? You know, for a place dedicated to healing, you're rather a grim advertisement for our services." A few cruel chuckles rippled through the air. Imani's face burned, a heat more intense than any fever she had ever treated. She met his gaze, her own dark and steady. "I'm here because I was told to be, Doctor." His smile widened, a predator's gleam in his eyes. "Of course. Well, don't get your hopes up. In a room full of perfection, a damaged thing like you stands out for all the wrong reasons. Let's be honest, what man of any consequence would ever choose a poor, scarred nurse? Your charity work, my dear. And nobody here is that charitable." The words were bullets, each one finding its mark. The world around her seemed to shrink, the glittering lights blurring into a painful smear. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, dissecting her, agreeing with him. Just as the humiliation threatened to swallow her whole, a hush fell over the entrance. A long, black armored car, impossibly sleek and silent, had pulled up to the curb. It was a vehicle that didn't belong in a fleet of limousines. It belonged to a king or a phantom. The valet, usually so composed, hesitated, looking utterly intimidated. The rear door remained closed, but its presence was a gravitational pull, a dark star that had suddenly appeared in their glittering galaxy, drawing all light and attention towards it. Imani didn't wait to see who emerged. She couldn't bear another second in that room. Turning her back on the silent, gawking crowd and Dr. Finch's smug face, she slipped out a side door into the cool, damp night. The city air was a balm on her burning cheeks. Tears she refused to shed in front of them now threatened to fall. She wrapped her arms around herself, walking quickly down the rain-slicked pavement, the sound of her own worn-out sneakers a lonely rhythm against the distant city hum. She just wanted to disappear, to fold into the shadows and become invisible. She was a block away from the opulent hotel when the armored car glided to a stop beside her, its engine a deep, near-silent purr. It moved with a lethal grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. Imani froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. Was she in some kind of trouble? The rear window, tinted to an impossible black, slid down with a faint hiss. Inside, bathed in the soft, ambient glow of the vehicle's interior, sat a man. His features were sharp, sculpted, his dark hair impeccably styled. He wore a black suit of a quality she couldn't even name, and his eyes, dark and piercing, held an unnerving stillness. He looked directly at her, not with pity or disgust, but with an intensity that seemed to see past the scar, past the cheap scrubs, and into the very core of her. "You left the party," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was a low, smooth baritone, laced with an accent she couldn't quite place, subtly Korean, yet polished by years of international travel. "It wasn't my party," Imani replied, her voice shaky but firm. She clutched her worn bag tighter, ready to run. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, as if he understood everything she wasn't saying. "The rain is starting. It's a long walk to the nearest bus stop. Allow me to offer you a ride." His offer was polite, but his tone held a quiet authority that brooked no argument. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a decision that had already been made. Imani hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to run from this powerful, dangerous-looking stranger. But then she thought of Dr. Finch's cruel words, of the pitying stares, and of the cold, lonely bus ride home. This man's gaze held no pity. It held something else. Curiosity. Respect, perhaps. "I don't even know who you are," she said, the words a small act of defiance. A flicker of a smile touched his lips. "My name is Minjun, and you are Imani." The best cardiac nurse at St. Jude's. He knew her name. The shock of it short-circuited her fear. With a resignation that felt more like fate than choice, she nodded. The door opened with a soft click. The inside of the car was another world. The scent of rich leather and something clean, like cold mountain air, filled her senses. The city's noise vanished, replaced by a profound, insulated silence. Imani sat stiffly on the edge of the plush seat, acutely aware of her faded scrubs and the worn-out state of her shoes against the deep pile carpet. Minjun didn't speak at first, allowing the silence to settle between them. He simply watched the city lights slide past the window, his profile etched against the neon glow. The quiet wasn't awkward. It was thoughtful, giving her space to breathe after the ordeal at the gala. "Dr. Finch is a man who mistakes cruelty for strength," he finally said, his voice calm and even. He hadn't seen the confrontation, yet he knew. He understood. "He's a respected surgeon," Imani murmured, the habit of defending the hospital's hierarchy ingrained in her. "Respect is earned through character, not title," Minjun countered smoothly. He turned his gaze from the window to her, and once again, she felt that unnerving focus. "Your scar," he began, and her stomach clenched, bracing for the inevitable comment. But he didn't say what she expected. "It has the pattern of shattered glass." Imani's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever described it like that. They called it ugly, a flaw, a disfigurement. He saw it with the detached precision of an artist or a forensics expert. "A car accident," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "A long time ago. It took my parents." She hadn't meant to share that, the deepest wound of all, the one that no one could see. But there was something about his quiet, commanding presence that drew the truth out of her. He simply nodded, his expression unreadable but for a flicker of something deep in his dark eyes. It wasn't pity. It was understanding. The car pulled up to her modest apartment building, a stark contrast to the opulence of the gala and the vehicle she was in. "Thank you for the ride, Mr. Kwan," she said, her voice regaining some of its professional composure.
"Minjun, høj karakter her Jensli."
"I will see you again, Imani." It wasn't a hope, it was a statement of fact. As she watched the black car disappear into the night, she felt a strange mix of fear and something she hadn't felt in years, a spark of bewildered curiosity. The next day at the hospital, a delivery arrived at the main nurse's station. It was a large, breathtakingly beautiful arrangement of pure white lilies, their fragrance filling the sterile air. The other nurses buzzed with excitement, speculating which doctor had sent them to which love interest. The card, however, was a small, plain white rectangle. On it, in elegant, sharp script, was a single word, Imani. The lilies became a source of intense speculation. Imani endured a fresh wave of whispers, a mixture of envy and disbelief. Dr. Finch scoffed openly in the corridor. "Someone sending you flowers? They must be blind. Or perhaps it's a thank you from a grateful patient who you didn't manage to kill." He laughed at his own joke, but Imani simply walked away, the scent of the lilies clinging to her like a shield. His words had lost some of their power. The memory of Minjun's quiet respect was a small, warm coal in the cold cavern of her loneliness. She found herself looking for his black car on her way to and from work, a foolish, hopeful habit she couldn't shake. A week later, she was huddled in her favorite small coffee shop, a refuge 2 blocks from the hospital where the noise of the city seemed to fade away. She was sketching in a small notebook, a talent she'd nurtured in private since childhood, a way to process the world. The bell above the door chimed, and when she looked up, he was there.
Mignon.
He was dressed more casually this time, in a dark turtleneck and tailored trousers, but he still radiated the same potent aura of power and stillness. He moved with an unnerving silence, ordering a black coffee before walking to her table. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair. She just nodded, her heart starting a frantic rhythm that had nothing to do with caffeine. "How did you know I'd be here?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. He took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving hers. "I make it my business to know things that are important to me." The statement was both simple and deeply profound, and it sent a shiver down her spine. He gestured to her notebook. "You're an artist." "I just draw." "It helps me think." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze dropping to the open page. It was a detailed sketch of an elderly patient's hands, gnarled with arthritis, but clasped together in a gesture of peace. "You don't just draw what you see," Minjun observed, his voice low. "You draw what you feel. You see the story in people." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers again. It is a rare gift. For the first time, someone was seeing her, the person behind the uniform and the scar, and his perception was so accurate it was almost frightening. They talked for over an hour. He asked about her work, not the clinical details but the human element, the triumphs, the heartbreaks, the quiet moments of connection. In return, he offered small, carefully chosen pieces of himself. He spoke of traveling, of the crushing loneliness of beautiful, empty hotel rooms, of a world where trust was a commodity more precious than gold. He never once mentioned his business, yet she could feel the weight of it in his words, the burden of a life lived on a knife's edge. If you've ever felt unseen, and then suddenly felt someone was seeing right into your soul, you know the feeling that was blooming in Imani's chest. It was terrifying and wonderful all at once. If you believe everyone deserves to be truly seen, hit that like button and let us know in the comments. This was only the beginning of their story. Their meetings became a quiet, unstated routine. He never called, never texted. He would simply appear, as if guided by an unseen current that always led him to her. One afternoon, he took her to a private art gallery, a minimalist space that was closed to the public. They walked through the silent halls, the only sound the soft echo of their footsteps. He didn't lecture her about the art. Instead, he watched her, gauging her reactions, listening intently as she spoke about the colors and emotions a painting evoked in her. Another day, they walked through a secluded botanical garden, a hidden gem in the heart of the city. While she marveled at the exotic flowers, he pointed out a small, resilient weed growing through a crack in the stone path. "Some things are not meant to be broken," he said, his eyes on her. "They just find a new way to grow." The words were for the plant, but they were also for her, and she knew it. With every meeting, the walls around her heart, built high by years of grief and casual cruelty, began to crumble. She started to trust him, a slow, tentative unfurling like a shy bloom. She told him about her dream of opening a free clinic in her old neighborhood, a place that would offer care with dignity to those who couldn't afford it. It was a pipe dream, a fantasy she'd never spoken aloud to anyone. He listened without interruption, his expression serious, filing the information away. While her personal world was expanding with this newfound light, her professional life was darkening. Dr. Finch, perhaps sensing her growing confidence or angered by the mysterious flowers, escalated his campaign of harassment. He began questioning her medical charts in front of colleagues, subtly implying incompetence. He assigned her to the most difficult, emotionally draining cases back-to-back, trying to burn her out. He submitted a formal complaint against her, citing a fabricated error in a patient's medication dosage, a lie that could end her career. Imani felt the old fear creeping back in, the familiar dread that her life was destined to be a struggle against tides she couldn't control. She tried to hide it from Minjun, not wanting to burden him with her problems, but he saw the new tension in her shoulders, the dimming of the light in her eyes. One evening, as they sat on a park bench watching the sunset, he turned to her. "Tell me what he is doing to you. It wasn't a request." She finally broke, the story of Finch's relentless bullying pouring out of her. Minjun listened in absolute silence, his face becoming a mask of cold, controlled fury. The air around him grew heavy, dangerous. When she finished, he simply said, "This will end," and in that moment, Imani had no doubt that it would. She was just beginning to understand that Kwon Minjun was not a man who made idle threats. The night of the St. Jude's Innovators Gala was even more extravagant than the last. This time, the hospital was celebrating a new surgical wing, and the highlight of the evening was to be the presentation of the Physician of the Year award to Dr. Alistair Finch. Imani was on duty again, the dread in her stomach a cold, hard knot. Her hearing for the formal complaint was scheduled for the next morning. It was her word against the department heads. She knew how it would end. She was restocking a supply cart in an alcove when Finch, resplendent in a tuxedo, cornered her. He was flushed with wine and victory. Well, he sneered, blocking her exit. "Enjoying my big night? I'd get a good look. After tomorrow, you won't even have a key card to get into this building." "A little bird told me the board finds my complaint very compelling." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "I told you no one would choose you. You're nothing. A charity case with a ruined face. Once you're gone, no one will even remember your name." The finality in his tone was like a physical blow. This was it. The end of the career she had fought so hard for. Just as despair washed over her, the grand ballroom doors at the end of the hall swung open with a sudden, authoritative force. A wave of silence rolled through the chattering crowd. Standing in the entrance was Kwon Minjun. He was not the discreet man from a coffee shop. He was flanked by his silent, imposing associate, Kong, and 4 other men in dark, severe suits. Minjun himself was dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that made him look less like a guest and more like an emperor. Every eye in the room, including the flustered hospital directors, was fixed on him. The director, a portly man named Henderson, scurried over, his face a mask of anxious confusion and deference. "Mr. Kwon, we weren't expecting you." "What an honor." Finch's sneer faltered, replaced by a look of utter bewilderment. He looked from the director to Minjun, unable to connect the dots. Minjun's eyes scanned the room for a brief second before they found Imani, still trapped in the alcove by a now-frozen Dr. Finch. He ignored the director completely. He began to walk forward, his every step deliberate and soundless on the marble floor. The crowd parted for him as if he were royalty. He walked directly towards her, his gaze locked with hers, a silent promise passing between them. He stopped right in front of her and the stunned surgeon. He gently, tenderly, reached out and cupped her face, his thumb stroking the jagged line of her scar. He did it in front of everyone, the board members, the doctors, the nurses, the city's elite. It was an act of breathtaking intimacy and defiance. The entire ballroom held its breath. Minjun's touch was warm against Imani's cold skin. For a moment, the entire world fell away, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of profound silence. He held her gaze, his dark eyes communicating strength, validation, and a fierce protectiveness that made her knees feel weak. Then, he slowly lowered his hand and turned his attention to the room, his posture shifting from gentle to formidable. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it cut through the silence with the chilling precision of a scalpel. "Director Henderson," he began, his eyes landing on the sweating man. "You are about to present an award for excellence. A celebration of the values this hospital purports to uphold." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He then gestured with his chin towards Imani. "This woman, Nurse Imani, is the living embodiment of those values. She works double shifts. She treats every patient with a compassion that cannot be taught, and she endures a toxic work environment with a dignity most of you could not fathom. His gaze then swiveled to Dr. Finch, who had turned a pasty white. And this man, Minjun's voice dropped, laced with ice, is the poison that has been allowed to fester within these walls for far too long. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Director Henderson started to stammer. Mr. Kwan, I don't understand. Dr. Finch is our finest. Your finest charlatan, Minjun interrupted smoothly. He gave a sharp nod to Kong, who stepped forward holding a sleek, slim tablet. Dr. Finch has a complaint filed against this nurse, alleging incompetence. A complaint you are planning to rubber stamp tomorrow morning. Kong touched the tablet and the massive presentation screen behind the stage, which had been displaying the hospital's logo, flickered to life. An internal email from Finch to a colleague appeared, massive for all to see. It read, "Need to get rid of the scarred nurse in cardio. She's dragging down the unit's image. I'll fabricate a med error. She won't stand a chance." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Kong swiped, and another document appeared, financial records showing Dr. Finch had been receiving substantial kickbacks from a medical device company.
Swipe.
3 more formal harassment complaints against Finch from junior nurses, all of which had been buried by hospital administration.
Swipe.
A patient's testimony, recorded on video, detailing how Finch had dismissed their concerns, leading to a near-fatal complication. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable, and utterly damning. It was a public execution, carried out with chilling, strategic brilliance. The fallout was a catastrophic implosion of Dr. Finch's carefully constructed world. He stood there, exposed under the glare of the projector screen, his face a grotesque mask of disbelief and horror. This is slander. It's illegal, he sputtered, his voice cracking. Minjun's expression remained impassive, as cold and hard as granite. Everything you see has been verified by my legal team and has already been forwarded to the medical board and the district attorney's office, he stated calmly. Your career in this city, doctor, is over. Director Henderson looked as if he were about to faint, his complicity in burying the previous complaints now laid bare for his donors and board members to see. The murmurs in the room turned into a roar of outrage and condemnation. The very people who had laughed at Finch's cruel jokes an hour ago now looked at him with disgust, distancing themselves from the spreading stain of his disgrace. Security was called, not for Imani, but to escort a babbling, protesting Dr. Finch from the premises, his reputation in ashes around him. In the midst of the chaos, Minjun was an island of calm. He turned back to Imani, his focus entirely on her, effectively shielding her from the whirlwind of whispers and pointing fingers. The stares she received now were no longer of pity, but of awe and respect. She had been vindicated in the most public and spectacular way imaginable. "Are you all right?" he asked her, his voice softening, the dangerous edge gone, replaced by a deep, genuine concern. She could only nod, her throat tight with a storm of unshed tears, tears of shock, of relief, of a profound, soul-shaking gratitude. She had spent so many years making herself small, absorbing the cruelty of the world and turning it inward as shame. She had believed on some level that Finch was right, that she was damaged. Minjun hadn't just exposed a villain, he had shattered the mirror of her own self-doubt. "They judged the surface," he said softly, seeming to read her mind. "I saw your strength. I saw your soul. Never let anyone make you forget its worth again." He offered her his arm, a formal, old-world gesture. "Let's get out of here." As they walked through the stunned, parting crowd, leaving the wreckage of the gala behind them, Imani felt as though she was walking out of a long, dark prison and into the light. She was no longer just the poor, scarred nurse. She was Imani, and she was standing beside the storm. In the weeks that followed, a quiet revolution took place at St. Jude's. Director Henderson was forced into an early retirement, and a new administration, under intense scrutiny, began a complete overhaul of hospital policies regarding staff welfare and harassment. Imani's name was cleared, and the fabricated complaint was expunged with a slew of formal apologies. She was offered a promotion, a leadership role in nurse training, but she politely declined. Her path, she realized, was no longer within those walls. True to his word, Minjun helped her make her dream a reality. His resources, which she now understood were practically limitless, were put at her disposal. He wasn't just a wealthy businessman. He was the head of a powerful, shadowy syndicate with global reach, a fact he explained to her with quiet honesty one evening. His world was one of danger and secrets, built on a strict code of honor that protected the innocent and ruthlessly punished the corrupt. He had used its power to bring Finch to justice. Now he was using it to build something beautiful with her. They worked together, side by side, to establish the Grace Memorial Clinic, named in honor of Imani's mother. He handled the finances, the logistics, the brutal negotiations for property and equipment, cutting through red tape with an efficiency that was breathtaking. She designed the patient care programs, interviewed staff, and ensured that the clinic's core mission, compassion and dignity, was embedded in its very foundation. Through the long days and late nights, their bond deepened into something profound. He saw her passion, her fierce intelligence, her unwavering empathy. She saw the man behind the formidable reputation, the burden of leadership he carried, the loneliness that still clung to him, the deep-seated desire to create a legacy of good to balance the darkness of his world. He finally told her about his own scars, the invisible ones left by a childhood of loss and betrayal in the unforgiving streets of Seoul. He had fought his way to the top, but the fight had cost him. "I built an empire of steel and shadow," he confessed to her one night, as they looked over the architectural plans for the clinic. "But I had nothing soft to come home to. No light. Until you." Their romance bloomed, not in candlelit dinners or grand gestures, but in shared purpose and quiet understanding. It was in the way he'd bring her coffee just as she was starting to feel tired, the way she would gently remind him to rest, to step away from the crushing weight of his responsibilities. It was a partnership of two survivors who had found in each other a safe harbor. The day the Grace Memorial Clinic opened was bright and clear, a perfect autumn afternoon. The modest brick building had been transformed into a state-of-the-art facility, a beacon of hope in the neighborhood where Imani had grown up. The opening ceremony was a community affair, filled with local families, city officials, and former patients who had come to support the nurse who had always shown them kindness. Imani stood at the podium, not in scrubs, but in a simple, elegant dress. She no longer felt the need to hide her scar with her hair. It was part of her, a testament to her survival, a piece of her story. She spoke with a quiet confidence that captivated the crowd, her voice filled with passion and conviction. She spoke of her mother's grace, of the fundamental right to healthcare, and of the power of compassion to heal not just bodies, but entire communities. Minjun stood at the back of the crowd, watching her. He was flanked by Kong, but today his formidable presence was softened by an expression of immense, unadulterated pride. He was not Mr. Kwan, the fearsome syndicate boss. He was simply a man watching the woman he loved step into her own power, a power he had helped her reclaim. He saw her not as a project he had saved, but as a queen who had finally been given her crown. Later that evening, after the last guest had departed and a contented silence had settled over the new clinic, they stood together on the rooftop garden they had designed. The city lights twinkled below them, a sea of a million stories. The cool night air was filled with the scent of new beginnings. "You are magnificent today," he said, his voice a low rumble beside her. "I've never been prouder." She turned to him, her heart full. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Minjun. You had the strength in you all along," he countered gently. "I just helped you clear the path." He reached out, his fingers tracing the silvery line on her cheek with a familiar, reverent touch. The gesture no longer carried the weight of past trauma. It was an intimate language between them, a symbol of their shared journey. "I used to hate it," she confessed, her voice soft. "I thought it made me ugly. Unworthy." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. His eyes, dark and deep, held the reflection of the city lights and all the love in his soul. "This is not a flaw," he whispered, his lips brushing against her skin. "It is a map of your strength, a testament to everything you survived." He then moved his lips to the scar itself, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to the place of her deepest wound. And it led you to me. Imani closed her eyes, a single, happy tear tracing a new path down her cheek. In his arms, she was not broken, not damaged, not a charity case. She was whole. She was loved. She was home. The Korean mafia boss and the poor black nurse, two scarred souls from different worlds, had found their own perfect, beautiful, and unshakable peace, building a new empire not of shadows, but of light.